The moment the war truly ended wasn't on a battlefield, nor in a surrender document signed in ceremony. It was in a dark cellar beneath a ruined farmhouse in Okinawa, where a child's cough broke the silence and a can of peaches changed everything. August 1945. The air was thick with the stench of smoke, rain, and decay, a bitter mix of gunpowder and the unspoken horrors of war. A squad of U.S. Marines moved through the wreckage of a farmhouse, boots crunching over shattered glass, rifles raised. The official word was that the war was over, but no one had told the ghosts still hiding in the walls. Then, beneath the floorboards, they heard it, breathing, slow, controlled, too careful to be an animal. Then, a cough, high, muffled, terrified. A child. The Marines froze. In that breathless silence, the war narrowed to a single sound, the click of a rifle safety switching off. The sergeant signaled. Two men dropped to their knees, pried open a wooden trap door, and the stench of damp earth and fear rushed out. Below, 7 Japanese women huddled in the dark, their faces streaked with soot, eyes wide with terror. Children clung to them, small and silent as shadows. No weapons, no soldiers, just the human wreckage of a war that had consumed everything. One woman held a shard of glass to her throat, her body rigid with the certainty of what came next. Torture, death, humiliation. The propaganda had promised it. The Marines stared back, their rifles heavy in their hands, their own faces a mix of shock and confusion. One woman whispered, trembling, "They said you'd cut us open." For months, leaflets and radio broadcasts had warned civilians that surrender meant horror. But now, under the dim light bleeding through cracks in the floor, the truth stood before them, awkward and quiet, holding rifles and rations. The youngest Marine couldn't look away from the baby, wrapped in a scrap of the rising sun flag. He stepped forward, his weapon slung behind him, every man in the room knowing what protocol demanded. Clear the area, detain the civilians. But protocol had never accounted for this. He reached into his pouch, pulled out a tin of peaches, and held it out. The metal caught the light. His voice, rough from smoke and exhaustion, broke the silence with a single word. Food. The women flinched. No one moved. He set the can on the dirt floor and backed away. 5 seconds passed. 10. Then, a small hand reached out, shaking, and took it. The hiss of the can opener was louder than any gunfire they'd heard in weeks. The sweet, cloying smell of fruit filled the bunker. One child began to cry, but not from fear. Upstairs, a Marine called out, "Doc, we've got civilians." The sergeant exhaled, lowering his rifle. The battle for Okinawa was over, but something else had just begun. The women hesitated, staring at the can like it might explode. The Marine didn't move. Just one quiet word. Food. That was all it took to crack through years of fear and lies. The other Marines watched, their rifles half lowered, unsure if this was mercy or madness. Smoke drifted through the broken beams above, the distant echo of artillery still rumbling somewhere beyond the hills. A war that had turned language into lies. This was the first honest word anyone had heard in months. A woman, no older than 20, reached for the peaches. Her hands trembled so violently the lid slipped, spilling golden juice onto the dirt, bright as blood. She froze, waiting for punishment. Instead, a Marine crouched beside her, pulled a spoon from his pocket, and placed it gently beside the can. No words, just a nod. That small, human gesture hit harder than any bullet. By 1945, the U.S. military had shipped over 20 million rations across the Pacific. Every tin, every biscuit, was part of a machine built for war, capable of feeding armies or rebuilding villages. To these women, the peaches weren't just food. They were proof that the enemy could afford kindness. They offered us food like we were people. One survivor later recalled. That moment turned fear into confusion, confusion into disbelief. The Marines, still cautious, called for medics. "Tell the dark, we've got civilians," one shouted through the rubble. The women didn't understand the words, but they understood the tone, urgency, not rage. The oldest woman murmured a prayer or a warning. Her daughter, eyes red from smoke, whispered back, "If they meant to kill us, we'd be dead already." The Marines formed a loose perimeter around the trapdoor, guarding them from an enemy that no longer existed. There was no rule book for this, just the quiet collapse of hatred. Boots thudded overhead. A voice yelled, "Medics coming!" The sergeant nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon. The air smelled of salt and burnt wood. Inside the cellar, the women waited for the next order. But what came wasn't an order at all. A corpsman ducked under the shattered doorway, his helmet still slick with rain. "Civilians?" he asked, disbelief in his voice. The sergeant pointed downward. The medic descended, his flashlight flickering across faces pale with fear. Not injury. Then he sawed a clean cut across a young woman's wrist, wrapped in a strip of her kimono. "Suicide, not shrapnel," he muttered. He knelt, unrolling bandages with practiced hands. The women flinched at the smell of antiseptic, certain it was poison. "Easy," he said, half to them, half to himself. Every movement was deliberate glove, pressure, wrap. Then his light caught something in the woman's sleeve. Tiny glass vials, blackened and sealed. Cyanide. He laid them in a row beside her, silent proof of how deep the fear ran. The medic touched nothing else. Not their clothes, not their last weapons of despair, just the wounds. Reports from Okinawa show that after the battle, U.S. medics treated over 18,000 Japanese civilians, many for self-inflicted injuries. To these women, surrender meant shame worse than death. But this foreign soldier was tending them with a calm they couldn't comprehend. "We were taught to die clean," one later said. "He cleaned our wounds instead." The medic's hands didn't shake. He'd stitched up Marines torn apart by grenades, held boys as they bled out, cursed the sky in the middle of firefights. But here, in a dirt cellar, he found himself speaking softly to the enemy. "You're okay. No more fighting." They couldn't understand the words, but the tone carried something older than language. "Decency." The baby whimpered. The medic glanced up, nodding to another Marine. "Water," he ordered. A canteen passed down like an offering. The mother hesitated, then took it. The child drank greedily, spilling half down her chin. The medic smiled, the first smile these women had seen from an American. He sat back on his heels, wiping sweat from his brow. "They'll live," he said quietly, but his eyes held a question no manual could answer. In the corner, a small pile of books lay half-burnt, their cloth bindings charred. He reached for one, brushing off the ash, and froze at what he saw inside. The pages were filled with neat, looping handwriting, childish, disciplined. But the words weren't lessons in arithmetic or poetry. They were slogans. "Asterisk die before surrender. The Emperor is our soul. Americans are demons." Asterisk. He turned the page. The same lines, over and over. A child's handwriting practicing hate. The Marines gathered around, their helmets tilted forward, unsure what they were looking at. One called for an interpreter. The young corporal who spoke broken Japanese crouched beside them, his lips tightening as he translated aloud. Each phrase landed like shrapnel in the silence. These weren't textbooks. They were indoctrination manuals. Imperial Japan had printed over 140,000 national defense schoolbooks in 1944 alone, turning classrooms into training camps for loyalty and fear. Every sentence prepared a generation to die beautifully, not live freely. The women in the cellar watched the Marines read, expecting laughter or anger. None came. The sergeant just stared at the notebook, his thumb smudging the soot. "Kids wrote this?" he asked quietly. The interpreter nodded. "Yes, sir. Every school." One Marine exhaled, long and low. "They even train their children to fear kindness." The irony was suffocating. The enemy's children had been taught to die, while these same Americans were now feeding and healing their mothers. The medic closed the book gently, as if afraid to break it further. The cover had a name written in childish brushstrokes. Asterisk, Yumi Sato, age 9. Asterisk. He looked at the smallest girl in the corner and realized it was hers. She avoided his eyes, clutching her mother's sleeve. Outside, the rain had stopped. The smell of wet earth mixed with ash. A Marine tore a page from the notebook, not in anger, but confusion. He folded it, slipped it into his pocket, a souvenir of something he couldn't explain. For the first time, the women saw uncertainty on the soldiers' faces. Not hatred, not pride, just disbelief at what fear could make a nation teach. The sergeant stood, his shoulders heavy. "Feed them again," he said. "They look hungry." And so, the next morning, breakfast began with rations meant for war. Morning came gray and heavy, the kind of light that makes everything feel like a photograph already fading. Smoke still curled from the ruins, but the guns were silent. The Marines gathered in what was once a courtyard, now just bricks and twisted metal, and unpacked their rations. Tins of Spam, hard biscuits, coffee powder, a few more peaches. None of it looked like peace, but it smelled like it. They set the food before the women, stepping back each time. The civilians sat motionless, still braced for cruelty, disguised as kindness. One whispered, "Maybe they want to watch us beg." But when the smallest child reached for a biscuit, the Marine just smiled and turned away. That simple gesture, no command, no demand, was the first real proof the nightmare stories had been lies. In 1945, each Marine carried roughly 4,000 calories a day. These civilians were surviving on less than 800, scraping by on roots and weeds. Now, soldiers who had stormed beaches and bunkers were handing out their own meals. One by one, the women began to eat. The sound of chewing soft, uneven was strange against the silence of war. A young Marine watched quietly, counting his remaining rations under his breath. "We'll split mine," he told the medic. "They need more." Across the dirt clearing, a child laughed. Sharp, sudden, pure. For the Marines, it hit harder than a grenade blast. "I thought it was a trick." One woman later wrote in her diary, "Then my child smiled. That smile spread like a rumor, something alive, unplanned, unstoppable." The medic poured warm coffee into a dented tin cup, let the steam rise, and offered it to the oldest woman. She took it with both hands, trembling, murmuring a thank you. He didn't understand. The Marines didn't celebrate. They just sat among the ruins, sharing silence and canned food. Two sides of a war, too tired to hate anymore. But as the last spoon scraped the bottom of the tin, a radio crackled from the ridge. Static. Then a voice, distorted but unmistakable. "The Emperor of Japan." Every head turned. The interpreter's eyes widened. "It's him," he whispered. "The Emperor. He's speaking." The radio hissed like a snake waking up. Static filled the air. Then a voice, soft, formal, strangely distant. None of the Marines understood, but the interpreter froze mid-breath. "The Emperor," he whispered. "He's surrendering." For a moment, no one moved. The civilians sat up straight, straining to hear. Hirohito's voice drifted through the broken courtyard, brittle as glass. "We have decided to effect a settlement of the present situation. It was the first time his people had ever heard him speak. The divine made human. The god reduced to a man admitting defeat. The youngest woman began to shake, whispering prayers. Her mother pressed a hand to her mouth to stifle a sob. The Marines exchanged glances. This wasn't triumph. It was grief, too big for language. The interpreter translated softly, piece by piece. He says, "The war is over." Okinawa had taken over 100,000 civilian lives, nearly a third of the island's population. Now, in this small clearing, the survivors were learning that everything they had fought for, all the slogans, all the fear, had ended with a single radio broadcast. The medic turned the dial down, letting the voice fade. "He sounded human," one woman murmured. That was the shock. Their emperor, who they believed divine, was just a man with a tired voice. The mythology cracked right there. The Marines didn't cheer. No one shouted victory. They just listened to the slow unraveling of an empire. A child tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Are we safe now?" The mother didn't answer. No one really knew what peace looked like anymore. The sergeant finally spoke, low and steady. "We'll keep them here," he told the medics, "until command decides what to do." It wasn't an order to celebrate or punish, just to care. As the sun dipped behind the ridge, the interpreter knelt beside the women. "You are not prisoners," he said in halting Japanese. "You are guests for now." They didn't believe him yet. Not fully. But something in his tone made them look up. "What happens to us now?" one asked. The answer came the next morning in tents, not cells. At sunrise, the Marines started building shelters from spare canvas and broken poles. The war had ended, but the occupation had just begun, and no one knew the rules. The civilians were too few for a village, too many for a cell block. So the sergeant made a decision that wasn't in any manual. "We'll keep them here, feed them, let them rest." And just like that, a new kind of camp was born, one without fences. The women watched in weary silence as the Marines hammered stakes into the dirt. They'd heard the word times prisoner times before, and it always came with barbed wire in their minds. But when the tents went up, they saw something different. Open flaps, blankets, buckets of water and soap. The Marines even marked each tent with small cardboard signs, not numbers, but names written carefully in English and katakana. "They gave us towels with our names stitched," one survivor later recalled. "Even our own army never did that." It wasn't charity, it was logistics. Pacific Command had ordered civilian holding areas to stabilize the island. About 15,000 people were processed in Okinawa alone. But for these women, every meal, every bandage, every act of normalcy felt impossible. They'd been raised to expect annihilation. Now they were being asked to rebuild. The daily rhythm was strange, but steady. Breakfast at dawn rice if the Marines could trade for it. Rations otherwise. Chores followed. Cleaning, washing, helping medics. Children started drawing in the dirt again, sketching houses that no longer existed. The Marines looked away sometimes, embarrassed by the gentleness of it all. One woman, quieter than the rest, spent hours sitting by a rusted truck shell with a notebook. She wrote in neat lines, pausing only when tears blurred the ink. No one asked what she was writing. But each night, when the camp dimmed, she lit a stub of candle and wrote again, her grief finding shape in words. The camp wasn't paradise. It was humid, tense, uncertain. Yet, for the first time since the war began, no one was dying. The medic passed her tent one night, saw her writing by candlelight, and wondered what story she'd someday tell. He didn't know she was writing to her brother. Night settled gently over the temporary camp, the kind of quiet darkness filled only with the hum of insects. A woman sat cross-legged on a wooden crate. a small candle flickering beside her. On her lap rested an old notebook she had carried through months of displacement. Its pages were worn, touched by weather and time. She wrote slowly, letting her thoughts spill out in uneven lines. Nearby, a passing guard noticed the faint glow of her candle. He paused for a moment, unsure whether to speak, then continued on his patrol. She glanced up briefly, saw the outline of his figure, then returned to her writing. Her notes shifted between memories of hardship and brief moments of kindness she had encountered in the camp. Someone who helped her wrap an injured wrist, the scent of fresh soap shared among the families, the steady rhythm of footsteps that signaled another night of safety. Writing gave her space to breathe, to steady herself, to understand how much had changed within her. Over time, her sketches transformed to fewer fences, more faces. She even practiced a few words she had recently learned from the aid workers. Thank you. Safe tomorrow. Before extinguishing her candle, she wrote a final line. Tomorrow, I will speak to the one who helped me. It wasn't obligation, it was courage. Morning came slowly, washing the camp in pale silver light. Walking barefoot across the damp grass, the woman clutched her journal tightly. Around her, workers were folding tents, stacking crates, and preparing for another day of routine. She spotted the person she had been looking for near a water barrel, sleeves rolled up, face marked with fatigue. For a moment, she hesitated. Then she stepped forward. He turned, surprised, but calm. She held out the notebook. For you, she said softly. He didn't understand the words on the page, but he understood the gesture. One section was gently marked. An interpreter read the message aloud. You helped us when everything felt uncertain. I will remember this kindness, the worker exhaled, touched in a way he couldn't quite explain. Unsure how to respond, he simply placed a hand over his chest in quiet acknowledgement. She bowed her head in return. In the months that followed, many residents of the camp volunteered to support rebuilding efforts, helping organize supplies, guiding families, assisting teachers, and restoring spaces for daily life. Slowly, conversations replaced silence, and routines replaced fear. As the woman walked away, he watched her go, the notebook resting in his hands. The camp smelled of morning air and clean fabric. Somewhere in the distance, vehicles rumbled to life. The hardship had begun with upheaval. But the earliest traces of peace began here in a simple exchange, offered with sincerity from both sides.